Can't keep up with the QA theme. Someone asked if I've read any Image or Valiant comics. So I'll discuss the comics that don't fall under Marvel and DC. Ironically, Marvel UK normally is separated from Marvel DC, and I love Marvel UK. Death Said 2 are phenomenal characters, but this is about the non-mainstream ones. So when it comes to Valiant, during the 90s, my local comic shop, which was, I want to say, it was CNS Comics in Wilmington, Illinois, really didn't cover that much in the way of the non-mainstream. So when it came to Valiant, I only read one comic. That was the debut of Valiant Vision. The idea was they took, I want to say, was it Solar? They had a character who was very brightly and vividly colored. Full bodysuit, like goggles. So they did a series called Valiant Vision. It was kind of a 3D-esque sort of thing. They did use of bright, vivid colors, and you wore glasses, and everything kind of shot out of the page. That's the only thing I've read of Valiant. I think that was the only book they actually carried, was that one. There's some other ones that came out later, but they didn't move well, so they didn't stop it, because comic book shops are all about get books in, sell books out, have more free space. Now to Image. Image, of course, was an offshoot of Marvel, which Marvel artists decided to make their own stuff. Predominantly known for Spawn. I love me some Spawn. Honestly, I owned the first 20 or some issues. A while back, when I started lots of my bindings, I actually went through and picked up a bunch of old trades of Spawn. Brilliantly done, big, phenomenal looking colors. Characters were just amazing. And it was drawn in a very different style. You know, this was the time when Marvel and DC both were kind of dark, but they weren't super violent. Where Spawn was uber violent. And I'll still say, when you watch the old animated shows, if you can find Spawn, which is on HBO, you can watch it now. The artwork still works today, and it's a very, very violent, very adult-oriented cartoon. It does it well. Counters that to Batman the Animated Series, which took adult-style themes, but portrayed them in the way that you could watch it with your kids. Spawn, don't watch it with your kids. Don't. Just don't. It's way too violent for kids to watch. So when it came to Image, I read Spawn. That was about it. Now the offshoot of Image, of course, was Top Cow. I really liked Top Cow. I read The Darkness from the first appearance. Ironically, I had Turner sign. Huge. I had Turner sign a bunch of my CG Seed Darkness comics. Even Witchblade number 10, which is Darkness number 0, when he carried it first. Well, technically it's the second time that Darkness is seen. Darkness is actually originally seen, I think it's Medieval Spawn Witchblade issue 2 or 3, is the first appearance of the Darkness. So I loved that character. I actually had all of the comics from the first time he showed up, and all of the tie-ins and trades, up until they did, it would have been just after Firstborn. So in the first 40 and the next 24, and then a couple more after that. I didn't like the Phil Hester run afterwards, because I thought that after the build-up from Firstborn, which I think was Stepan Sejic, I probably butchered his name, he does this just beautiful computer painted style. It's wow. If you can find his work, just if you type his name kind of close, you'll find it. It's just amazing stuff. And I thought that from Firstborn, I'm like, all right, now he's got a kid that was conceived by the Darkness. The Darkness, of course, had this really weird thing where you turn 20 when you get the power. However, if you get someone pregnant, you essentially die. The Darkness will then keep the child safe, and the child that's 21 will help the child. The concept itself is an amazing concept. I've often thought that, as I'm getting more and more out of comics because I don't have the time for them as much, about actually doing a bind where it's just all the non-Jackie staccato versions of the Darkness. So it'd be all the random one-shots they throw in, which are done very well. It's also other times it's a non-Sarah Penzi, I think it's a Batiste is the blonde Witchblade. All the ones where it's not those two, because it's a great concept. And even the idea of Excalibur, which of course is, well, Witchblade's considered male, the Viola attaches itself to female, so the man wears it, it can destroy their body. Then there was Excalibur, which is a goldish version of Witchblade, which Ian Nottingham got to use for a little bit, who is essentially one of the very few characters that actually kept on showing up in the Witchblade / Top Cow universe. I also enjoyed the Necromancer, which was one of their pilot series that actually was supposed to get an actual run, but only got a short run. So Top Cow I thought was interesting. They did a good job on their website and their message board, but being a small company, massive delays very frequently when it came to books coming out. And on the Witchblade and the Darkness side, they did do a good job of establishing villains. With the Darkness, you can pick an awesome four-issue arc. It's like, all right, this Yakuza guy, his tattoos come to life, but they're based out of smoke. So it's a guy who does like smoke dragons versus the Darkness that allows him to call pretty much a small army of pop culture reference-spitting creatures. Here we go. All right, issue 404, and Jackie kills him. Great. So I actually got out around the time Top Cow really began to build in all of its artifacts. So I was very much, I knew about the Magdalena. That was an interesting concept for a character. Liked it. Witchblade, Angelus, and the Darkness. I liked it. They did a good job actually making everything kind of feel like it mattered. And I liked that. But lots of issues when it came to stuff coming out on time, and with different changes and lots of rotations into who is doing art, who is doing story, characters seem to change drastically on a dime. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'll get out of this. So, Top Cow was good. I love their crossovers. Some really great crossovers. The fact that the Darkness actually can hang with Superman was impressive. Good work there. Other ones, Dark Horse, not as much. Of course, when Dark Horse had the Star Wars piece, they had some great Star Wars books. Really solid Star Wars books, especially when they got to show other more minor characters. They made that work beautifully well. Good jobs when it came to characters like Aura Singh. Yeah, they did great work with her. They did lots of really good miniseries, which really gave you a good in-depth look at smaller characters, which I thought was really good, because it actually fleshed out other characters you really didn't hear a lot about, but were interesting. So it's kind of like the expanded universe-esque when it comes to comics. They did a good job. Of course, they also had the rights to Predator, RoboCop, Terminator, Aliens. So a lot of time got spent with them doing crossover fights. And occasionally did things with DC. A little bit with Marvel. Predominantly DC. So if you wanted to read Batman vs. Predator, it was a Dark Horse book. They did it 3 times. Superman also fought Predator. Superman also fought Aliens quite a few times. Not bad. And for a couple issues they actually did do, I want to say one was called Mindhunter, where Witchblade and Darkness fought aliens and predators. It's a good basic concept. Take your people like, and then go, what if they fought? What if the Terminator fought RoboCop? Couldn't they just take him over? What if he was fighting the takeover while fighting Terminators? Okay. People like Judge Dredd, yeah. What if he shot a bunch of aliens? Are we just making Doom just a book? People like Doom. Let's do it. So they did a nice job of actually taking all the random characters and being like, and they'll all fight each other. Why not? We own the rights. We gotta sell books. People will be like, I like Aliens. Aliens fighting Predator? I'll buy that book. Aliens fighting Terminator? Buy that book. Aliens fighting Judge Dredd? Sure. Judge Dredd fighting aliens, fighting Predator, fighting Terminator, fighting RoboCop? Sure, why not? Aliens versus Green Lantern? Sure, let's do that too. So, while I haven't read a lot of other ones, ironically, I spent a lot of time reading EC comics. That's for the Tales of the Script people. I really, really enjoyed those. And then when I got into Marvel, that was another time that it was the Jim Lee X-Men. So I was really into that. And the problem with that is I watched about issue 30. I fell out of that because they did lots of crossovers. And if you weren't buying all the comics to get them in your pull box, for the place I was going at, they didn't carry as many Uncanny X-Men. They didn't carry as many X-Factor. So they're doing the crossovers. Those are the ones you can't find. And you really can't read issues, 2, 3, 4, and 6, 7, 8, and like 10, 11, 12, because you're missing good-sized chunks of the story. And around that time, you can only really get older comics if you went to a trade show or convention. And normally, those are the ones that people were missing because they weren't as popular. You spent more money on them. Again, this is pre-internet times. My first DC book was actually Death of Superman. I didn't like DC. And my first trade with DC would have been Death of Superman and then Reign of the Superman. I didn't really get into Green Lantern until I want to say it was Cinescape? One of the old websites had a series called Comic Books You Should Be Reading. And they mentioned a storyline called Brother's Keeper, which is the Jude Winnick arc that he was doing in Green Lantern, where he had Terry Berg. That, of course, was his homosexual assistant. They did an arc where he got beaten almost to death. And Green Lantern then kind of exacted some revenge in a very Batman-esque way. Read the trade and I was like, yeah, I like this. It was done well. Ironically, which is weird because people absolutely hate Jude Winnick's run. They really hate the social justice warrior aspect of it. And I was like, okay, it was something different. Up until that time, Hal Jordan Green Lantern had pretty much been Space Cop. Hard to relate to. So then I actually read through all the Kyle Rayner stuff. Yes, all of it. That's why I tried to go to, if I ever actually did the tour of the room sooner or later, I've got like a shelf. Well, actually, I have 2 shelves over there that are Green Lantern related binds, and then another shelf and a half over here. So I probably have pretty close. Well, there's shelf and a half. There's about 2.5. I probably have 4 shelves of Green Lantern custom binds. So, and of course Thanos. Love Thanos. So when it comes to the other ones, I know of them, I've read some of them, but I haven't read a lot of them. So as always, any other questions, feel free to post them.